And welcome to the regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Today's date is Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024. This meeting will now come to order. We'll begin with a moment of silence. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Apking.
Here.
Botana.
Here.
King.
Here.
Marker.
Here.
Schwartz.
Here.
Severson. York. Summers. 8 present.
Thank you. We're going to move on to item 5, approval of minutes. A copy of the regular meeting minutes for the January 10th, 2024 meeting were included in your backup materials. Is there any discussion from the commission? Do we have a motion? Motion to accept minutes as presented made by Commissioner Botana. Second by Commissioner Apking. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Apking.
Aye.
Botana. Aye. King.
Aye.
Marker.
Aye.
Schwartz.
Aye.
Severson. York.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item 6, and that's business, and we do have some business today. We have the appointment of a alternate. We have 1 space available, and I believe we have 2 applicants. And we'll just begin those, give the applicants a moment to speak. I believe 3 minutes is what you guys will be allotted. We'll begin with the applicant, Mr. Estes.
Well, good morning, Commissioners. Thank you very much for affording me some time to speak to you today. I am a relatively new resident of Cape Coral, moved here last summer. Getting involved, active in the Salem Power Squadron, currently attending Citizens Academy. I just got a pass so I could come over here and make some comments, but I'll be heading back there. Also looking at becoming a police volunteer here in your Marine Division. I enjoy boating, and that seems like an interesting thing to do. Last 15 years, I've spent my time teaching. I was a professor teaching real estate and paralegal studies. I've also, previous employment, done some real estate brokerage management training, and also my legal practice involved land use. So land use is something that I find very interesting. I like being involved in my community. I'm a past president of my Chamber of Commerce. The city I used to belong to had an economic development association in which the city, Chamber of Commerce, and the industrial park community would get together and do marketing and business outreach. Past president of Boys and Girls Club, and also served as a judge pro tem. Judge Pro Tem is a program where if judges are going to be on vacation or out for an extended period of time, they appoint an attorney to serve on the bench and hear cases on their behalf, and I found that very rewarding. I think it also taught me a lot about how a hearing should be done to follow due process. It's very important that people can be heard and that the public understands the process and how it's working. I served 8 years on a city council in Vista in California. There we also had a redevelopment agency, a little bit different, California law and Florida law, and I'm enjoying learning more about how your redevelopment agency works. We had a wastewater management joint powers authority. We didn't actually handle wastewater ourselves like the city here does, but familiar with that as well. I've always had an interest in land use planning, both in my legal practice, preparing variances and special use permits, but also handling appeals from the city council. I think it's exciting and it's interesting to watch how a community grows, how to plan for that, and to be a part of it. There are a lot of opportunities here in Cape Coral. It's exciting watching the city grow. You don't realize how big the city is until you actually get out there, and that's one of the things the Citizens Academy has taught me, how much is really going on in this city. I had a chance to look at your comprehensive plan. It's quite extensive. You ought to be commended for creating the document. But I think you have 11 elements, which is really more than most municipalities have. So that is me in a nutshell. I don't know if it's appropriate to field questions if you have any questions, but I appreciate the time and you allowing me to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and pardon me if I butchered your name. Is it Estes?
Estes.
Estes, okay, fantastic. Do we have any, what we'll do is we'll take the other applicant, and then we can ask some questions afterwards.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Jack Martin?
Good morning, committee chair, committee members. Thank you for having me this morning. I'm Jack Martin. I've been a resident here in Cape Coral since 2000. My family and I moved here from Michigan, and I've seen the city grow immensely. I'm familiar with its challenges, hurdles, and path for growth. I've got 2 children. Both of them are grown up now. I've been a real estate broker. I was licensed in 1989, and have done quite a bit with that. I've got the CCIM certification, which is Commercial Investment Member, and with that designation, it's like having a PhD in commercial real estate. Leadership roles in the community. This year, I am with the Florida Association of Realtors, District 5, Vice President, and immediate past President for the Royal Palm Coast Realtor Association 2023. And numerous chair and vice chair positions and committee positions along those lines as well. Community involvement, I've been pretty active in the community ever since I got here, really. Been a member of the Rotary Club of Cape Coral since 2008. Been through Leadership Cape Coral, Leadership Lee. I was past president of the Rotary Club 2012, 2013. Knights of Columbus, past Grand Knight. Boy Scouts, COR for Troop 34 for a number of years. Hobbies, boating, fishing, snow skiing, scuba diving, anything outdoors, really. Love the outdoors. So why planning and zoning? Well, I figured, first of all, it was better than auditing, since I was not a finance manager. And with my background in real estate, I figured planning and zoning would be a good fit. I'd like to get involved with the city and give something back. I haven't been involved in the city in the past. I figured this was a good entry point. Good place to begin. I'd like to give back to the city, which I've lived in, excuse me, for the past 24 years, my time and my talent. So thank you for your time this morning. Welcome questions.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Okay, I'll go ahead and open up to the commission, and we'll start with questions for Mr. Martin. That way we don't go back and forth here. Do we have any questions from the commission? Yes, Commissioner York.
Are you selling real estate still, or are you retired from that?
No, I'm not retired. Still selling real estate, full-time,
And you
but getting more active in the hierarchy of it, leadership and things like that. As I mentioned, this year I'm District 5 Vice President for Florida Realtors, which is 5 different associations in the area.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Mr. Martin? Seeing none, we'll move on to Mr. Estes. Do we have any questions from the commission? Seeing none? All
Oh,
right.
wait, I have a
Oh,
question.
sorry, York, Commissioner York.
So you moved to Cape Coral a year ago,
Yes.
and can I ask why you moved to Cape Coral from California?
Well, I was retiring, and my wife wanted warm weather and warm water. So she did actually she did an internet search, and she found Cape Coral. That was about about 4 years ago. And we've been out here the last 4 summers, spending considerable time here. We figured we'd come out here during the summer where the weather is going to be the warmest and the muggiest. And if we liked it, we'd move here, and we did. So we purchased property last spring and moved out here with our 3 cats. So it was quite an adventure on that airplane.
And are you currently going to sell real estate here, or are you out of the?
No, I'm actually retired. I haven't actually sold property for several years. Most of my real estate that I was doing was brokerage management or doing a lot of training. And of course, the last 15 years, I was a full-time tenured professor teaching strictly real estate and paralegal studies. Again, prior to that was my law practice as well, where I dealt with land use issues. But technically, I'm still employed by the college. They have a program where if you teach a class for no pay, you can assemble those classes together, and I'm technically on full pay until the end of December, although I'm not doing anything.
Okay. So the job will just be the teaching then?
Actually, I'm done teaching.
You're done teaching?
I'm done.
Okay.
I'm just getting paid because I taught classes before without pay. So I've linked those classes together, just kind of a nice send-off into my retirement. So I am fully retired.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, seeing no additional questions, do we have any motions for an appointment?
Yeah, I would nominate Mr. Estes. It's for the
Alternate, correct, alternate position.
I would recommend that.
Okay, so we have one motion to recommend Mr. Estes for the appointment to the alternate position. Do we have anybody who's like to appoint in another applicant?
I would like to appoint Mr. Martin.
Okay, so we have one appointment for each of the applicants. Madam City Clerk, do we want to run a tally vote?
Yes, Chair. Mr. Apking,
Estes.
Butana,
Estes?
King, Marker,
Estes.
Schwartz,
Martin.
Severson, York, six for Estes and one for Martin.
Okay. Can we get a formal motion to appoint Mr. Estes to the, motion to appoint Mr. Edwin Estes to the alternate position made by Commissioner Butana and a second by Commissioner Apking. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Apking,
Aye.
Botana,
Aye.
King, Marker,
Aye.
Schwartz,
Aye.
Severson, York. All ayes, motion carried.
Thank you. And thank you to the applicants. It's been every time for the last, I'd say at least 3 or 4 years that we have applicants come out. They seem to outdo the previous applicants every time. It's really nice. And I know that prior to my tenure, there were times when we couldn't fill this commission. Just talking to some of the seniors that were on here before I was. So it's nice to have really, really well achieved applicants out. So we appreciate it, Mr. Martin. We appreciate you coming out. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item, and that's item 7A, ordinance 20-24. And I believe the city has a presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. For the record, Mike Struve, Planning Team Coordinator with the Planning Division. So this particular ordinance is being brought forward to address some deficiencies we believe that currently appear in the city's land development code, and in particular with respect to several uses that we currently do not allow in the city. Since the adoption of the land development code in 2019, we've made very few revisions to the use table in the land development code. Several years ago, we added and also subtracted a couple of uses related to storage. This is probably the largest and most comprehensive effort we have made to this point. Certainly won't be the last in terms of incorporating some new uses into the Land Development Code. There are also some other related changes that are also necessitated by adding these uses to the Land Development Code. In Article 4, we're amending Table 4.1.6, which is actually our use table. We're also suggesting changes to another table in Article 4 that contains dimensional standards for the commercial corridor zoning district. In Article 5, we are making some ancillary uses to that article. That also includes proposing special requirements for a newly proposed use, which is a marine fuel pump use. And then in Article 11, which contains definition of a variety of terms in the cities, including uses, we are both adding new definitions for some of the new uses that we are recommending, as well as modifying a couple of definitions that are currently defined. This is a listing of the uses that we're proposing to add through 1 through 8 that you see here. Of these 8 uses, 5 of these were previously allowed in the land use and development regulations, and that was the code that the city administered going back to the latter half of 2019. So some of these uses are not new to the city, but due to the way that we now classify uses, they were in some cases inadvertently omitted when we adopted the Land Development Code. There are 3 brand new uses, and those include a marine fuel pump use that I mentioned earlier, and we'll look at in a little more detail in a second. A distribution center, which would allow for larger e-commerce facilities, if you want to think of a brand there, Amazon. And then a live workspace use that would be allowed in all of our mixed-use zoning districts. Marine fuel pump is a new use that we are proposing. We've included the definition here on the slide, and there's a couple things I think that I want to point out here. This is a fuel-related use that would provide fuel pumps as an accessory use only. So this is not in use that could be enjoyed by itself, but would be used in conjunction, for example, with a restaurant or maybe a retail store or shopping center that was located on water for people that want to, business owners that want to provide slips for people to allow people to motor up to their establishment and to either eat at a restaurant or purchase goods at a retail store. We're proposing that this use be allowed in a variety of non-residential and mixed-use zoning districts. We're also recommending that this be adopted with special regulations because we want to manage fairly closely where this use would be allowed. We don't want these fuel pumps to be easily permitted, particularly on small sites or on canals that are very narrow in width because of the potential for this to potentially increase boat traffic on these narrow canals. So for that reason, we're recommending that this be allowed on sites with a minimum of 2 acres in area. It be located on sites with waterways that have a width of at least 150 feet. That the site would have a minimum of 200 feet of continuous water frontage. And then lastly, that the use would only be allowed again as a ancillary or as an accessory use to a primary use on the property. In addition to those 8 uses that you saw on one of the previous slides, we're also recommending other changes to the use table that relate to uses that are currently allowed in the Land Development Code. And by and large, with one exception, we are proposing that several uses be expanded beyond the existing zoning districts in which they are allowed. So for example, we have an indoor commercial recreation use. We are recommending that be added to the industrial zoning district. We think there are opportunities there to allow for large buildings that are currently vacant or that are underutilized to take advantage of this type of use. That would allow for things like indoor training facilities. Commercial parking lots or garages, we're proposing to add that to both the commercial corridor and the mixed-use 7 zoning districts. Craft breweries, distilleries, and wineries, we're also proposing to add that to the industrial zoning district. One reason for this is because we would allow, and currently do allow by right, full-fledged breweries, distilleries, and wineries, so we think it makes sense to allow for a use that is limited in its alcohol production. It would be a less intensive use than one of those full-fledged breweries, wineries, or distilleries. And then also, these last 2 uses are somewhat related and also involve the industrial zoning district. We currently allow restaurants with drive-through facilities in the industrial zoning district. That was unintentionally allowed or permitted by staff. We really never intended to allow, for example, fast food restaurants with drive-through facilities in the industrial zoning district. So we are recommending that that be eliminated from the code. But conversely, we are recommending that we add restaurants without drive-through facilities to the industrial zoning district. I mentioned there were a couple of changes made to a table that pertains to the commercial corridor zoning district. One of those changes involves formatting. Right now, the table is a little difficult to read because of some of the lines in the table are not in proper alignment. So you see a lot of strike through and in that table, and this is just a formatting issue. There is one substantive change to this table, and that is we're recommending that the floor area ratio, which is a measure of the commercial intensity or how intense you can develop a site, be increased slightly from a floor area ratio to 1 to 1.25. Our comprehensive plan currently allows a maximum FAR of 1.25 for the Pine Island Road District future land use classification, which is consistent with the commercial corridor zoning district, and we think that that level of commercial intensity is certainly appropriate for the commercial corridor district. We also have definitions for several new uses. The definitions for new uses here are listed under bullet point number 1, and that includes a social service use, arcade, marine fuel pump, distribution center, towing establishment, 2 closely related uses, heliport, helistop, and then live workspace in a junkyard. We are not proposing to allow junkyards in the city. They were previously allowed under the LUDRs back in 2019, although I don't think we've had any new junkyards go through permitting for a long time. But we did want to add a definition to junkyards so we could make a clear distinction between a junkyard use and a towing establishment or open storage, which sometimes share similar characteristics. We are also providing definitions for several terms that were not previously defined before, but were allowed or are currently allowed in our code, and that includes professional services and solid waste transfer stations. We are revising or recommending revising one definition for a community center, and we're providing new definitions for 3 related terms that have nothing to do with uses per se, but that's for front, side, and rear yards because our regulations often refer to yards in terms of where particular types of improvements can be permitted or made. In summary, we believe that the uses that are proposed by staff will provide business opportunities and have the potential to increase the mix in goods and services to people living in Cape Coral. Most of the uses that we are recommending will appear in zoning districts where similar uses already exist, and we feel that that will minimize compatibility concerns or issues. And in some instances, specific uses will only be allowed by a special exception. Those special exception uses do require a hearing and approval by the hearing examiner, or will require special regulations, as is the case with the marina fuel pump use. The proposed changes, in summary, will provide owners with more opportunities in the city, reduce ambiguity, and provide clarity that is needed in the land development code, and will promote the health, safety, and welfare of the community. We are recommending approval of this ordinance. We have had some dialogue with, I believe, 2 different towing establishments that are interested in expanding and are currently being prevented from doing so. Outside from that, we've had no correspondence, and you see the schedule that's for this ordinance moving forward. After you consider this will be introduced on April 17th. This will require 2 public hearings before council, since we're making changes to the use table, with the first hearing on May 1st and then the second on May 15th. And I'll stand by for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Struve. This is a public hearing, so now I'd like to open up to the public for comment. If there's any members of the audience that wish to speak, please direct yourself to the podium and state your full name for the record. Seeing none, we'll close citizens' input. I'll open up to the commission. Do we have any comments from the commissioners? Commissioner York?
Yes, I just had a very couple questions. I love this idea of live workspace. Do we have that currently at all in Cape Coral?
Not that I'm aware of. I think our code is a little ambiguous in terms of where and if we would allow it. I think if you ask staff, you would say that it's something that we would allow in our mixed-use zoning districts, but we wanted to clarify and explicitly allow this in our mixed-use zoning districts. So this is situations where you have an existing commercial business, and as an accessory or ancillary use, you allow a person to live in that unit. And the sort of the stereotypic vision that people often have are these studios where you might have a loft where someone works in the studio and lives in that unit full time.
Yeah. And I had to look up the acronym FAR.
Floor area ratio, yes.
Yeah. So, because I couldn't figure out how 1.25 was a ratio, but so it's all the floor space. So if it's several floors high, it's all the floor space
Yes.
in the whole building, and that can only amount now to, with the change, 1.25 of the ground space.
Yeah. So the FAR of 1, the easy way for me to think about this is that whatever we'll get to the 1.25, but it's easier to think about FAR of 1 or 2 for me. So whatever the area of your site is in square feet, let's say you have an acre, 43,560 square feet, FAR of 1 says that you would be allowed a maximum of 43,560 square feet of building area, okay? That wouldn't be allowed in most zoning districts by our code, because you would have to allow for setbacks and parking and landscaping and other types of improvements. But that 43,560 square feet can be arranged or stacked, if you will, any way that you would like to. So that could result in a 2-story or 3-story building, or 4-story for that matter. Most developers never approach developing in the city up to the maximum FAR allowed.
Oh, they
The
don't?
average is somewhere between 0.2 and 0.25.
Oh,
But an FAR of 1.25 would obviously allow on a 1-acre site for more commercial development beyond 43,560 square feet.
okay.
So I hope that clarifies things rather than confuse.
Thank you.
Do we have any more comments from the commission? Commissioner Severson?
Thank you. One of my questions is on the marine fuel pump. There must be certain regulations that are imposed on anybody that would put that in. Is there anything that regards to a fire station or, I guess the question is there a separate set in the special uses portion that would require a fire station within a certain distance of the fuel pump, and how close a proximity, and if there's a fuel spill, how that's mitigated?
So in terms of fire station, no, there is not a hard requirement there that a fire station be located within a certain distance. But I think in general, we have levels of service for fire stations in the city, so that ensures that our response times provided by fire and for police, for that matter, are adequate to reach different areas of the city. So that's how that would indirectly be addressed. In terms of spills and that type of thing, there would be, when we review the plans, there would be stormwater requirements that would need to be met. That would include making sure that there was some type of collection system available to capture any spillage or runoff, so it wouldn't run off directly, for example, into a canal.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize Councilmember Welsh.
Yeah, looking through the new use tables, the one that sticks out to me is the one that's called arcade. Is that, can you let me know if those are like the little mini casino arcades that popped up quite a bit a while ago, and then they all seem to have shut down? Is that because of this LDC, or is this a different type of arcade?
No, that's the exact type of arcade that we're talking about here. We allowed that in the land use and development regulations, and then our new code did not specifically have a line for arcades. And under the old code, it was grouped more broadly with several other uses. And that use, again, was sort of inadvertently left out. So one reason we are proposing to reintroduce this back into the code would be to eliminate some of those existing, what are now considered legal non-conforming uses.
Yeah, because I see that as a very fine line between gambling and the word arcade, so.
I think technically it's considered a game of skill, but I think you're right. It's
Yeah, and there's also a lot of crime associated with, things like that coming in and out, so I'm just wanted to clarify that's what we were exactly talking about, adding this to our land development code. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Welsh. Any additional comments from the commission? So I did have 2 questions regarding 2 of the uses that I do think would have substantial impact on surrounding property. So that's obviously helipad, so a heliport, and then also the marine fueling area. You stated that those are going to come probably as a special exception. Do you have the criteria for that? We heard some criteria regarding the marine fueling. Do we have the criteria available for the heliport and then the helistop as well?
Yeah, so to address the marine fuel pump first, in order to make sure that those uses are compatible, that's why we have those special regulations that I mentioned, which require a fairly large site, location on a fairly large water body, and then moreover, not only on a large site, but with a good bit of water frontage, because we want those uses to a large extent limited where they can be accommodated. In terms of the heliport, helipad. I think those were uses that were actually recommended be included back into our code by our fire department staff. Those would be, and I could see those also potentially being needed or enjoyed by medical facilities, larger medical facilities. Those both are allowed by special exception, which means that they would require a hearing before the hearing examiner. We did look into establishing special regulations for those, but it appeared that when you're looking at items in regards to things like setbacks and parking and the size of those facilities, they seem to vary pretty widely from location to location based on some of the research that we investigated when it came to other communities permitting these facilities. So we thought it would just be, the best course of action would be to allow it as a special exception. If and when we get an application for that, we would look at the site specifically and try to match whatever conditions that we would recommend in governing that development to that particular site itself.
Okay. And it was kind of obviously the assumption. Would this be restricted to institutional use, so from the city, from an established hospital? This was not something that the private sector could take advantage of, is it?
The private sector could enjoy that in the zoning districts where it was allowed. I think it would be unlikely, although it would, they possibly could apply for a special exception to enjoy that use.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions or comments from the commission? Do we have a motion?
I move to approve ordinance 2024.
Motion to approve ordinance 2024 made by Commissioner York, second by Commissioner Severson. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Apking?
Aye.
Botana? King? Marker?
Aye.
Shorts?
Aye.
Severson? York? All ayes, motion carried.
Thank you. All right, moving on to the next item, we have item 7B, that's ordinance 21-24, and I believe we have a presentation from the city again.
Good morning again, Commissioners. Mike Strivey with the Planning Division. This is the second of two ordinances that we're bringing forward today that would make changes to the Land Development Code. And this one is much more targeted, if you will, in nature. This particular ordinance seeks to further relax parking standards for applicable areas of the South Cape zoning district only. And this amendment is being brought forward at the request of our city manager, and I'll go a little bit into the background of why we're bringing this forward in a second. Since 2012, the city has taken several steps to relax parking standards in the South Cape district. Ordinance 1512 established the South Cape zoning district, and when we did that, we adopted zoning regulations that were unique to that zoning district, and that included relaxing parking standards for multifamily development, as well as for most non-residential uses. In 2019, the City Council adopted Ordinance 1719, and this allowed developers with property in the South Cape within 500 feet of areas with on-street parking to utilize those striped spaces in the city right-of-way to meet their minimum parking standards for their site. And then lastly, this past year, or last year, Ordinance 6623, a change that many of you may remember, the city eliminated minimum parking standards for all parking lot sites. Parking lot sites are those properties that either directly abut or are separated by a platted alley from those 6 city parking areas located in the South Cape that include Club Square, the Iguana Mia parking lot, Big John's Plaza, and so on. Last year, Public Works worked with a couple of consultants to collect information on parking and transportation, and also multi-mobility in the South Cape zoning district. And there was, one of the reports that was produced was the South Cape Parking Management Plan. And as part of that data collection, citizens were surveyed as to their attitudes about parking, what they thought about parking, how difficult it was to secure parking, was it adequate, where did they park, what time of day, those types of things. And one of the survey results indicated that 79% of the respondents said that they would be willing to walk from where they park up to 2 blocks to their final destination. Based on that finding, we had some discussions with the city manager, and our city manager asked us to bring forward a code change that would further relax parking standards to provide more flexibility for those businesses that were located roughly within 2 blocks from some of these city-owned or managed public parking facilities. We had discussions with Public Works, and we settled on 660 feet as being a reasonable distance to sort of fit that bill for that 2-block distance that people, or most people, would be willing to walk on sort of an average day, not foregoing some of our really hot days or when it's raining like crazy at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the summer. So the proposal before you that's contained within this ordinance would allow developers to count existing public parking spaces within 660 feet of their site. And that could look or could appear in a number of different ways. In particular, could be grouped into 3 general categories. On-street parking, which we already allow developers to count towards meeting their parking requirements to a site up to 500 feet, so this would expand that to 660 feet. This would also include all properties within 660 feet of those city parking areas, so it would go beyond just those initial ring of parking area sites. And then lastly, developers could also receive credit for parking spaces that might be contained in any city or CRA sites that are developed for public parking. We are recommending approval of this change. We've had no correspondence on this particular ordinance. And schedule moving forward is this ordinance would be introduced on April 17th with a final public hearing scheduled before the City Council on this matter on May 1st. And I'll stand by in case you have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Struve. This is a public hearing. I'd like to open up to public input at this point. If there's any members of the audience that wish to speak, please direct yourself to the podium and state your full name for the record. Seeing none, we'll close citizens' input. Open up to the commission. Do we have any comments from the commissioners? Commissioner York?
So I knew we've been moving toward this because we have voted on, as you just mentioned, last year, in fact, something moving toward getting rid of parking spots for, I think it's the people that abut all the public parking lots. and, or the businesses that abut those. I would imagine business owners approve of this. Is that what
We
you're
have
finding?
some people that are, a very limited number of people that are following this, that are generally supportive of it, going back, I would say several months. I think we had some people that were enthused about the previous change, but in some cases were a little disappointed because while they had businesses close to these parking lot sites, they weren't technically a parking lot site. So we get a lot of questions about people, for example, from businesses on 47th that don't directly abut, for example, Club Square.
Right.
My neighbor across the street isn't required to provide parking. Do I have to provide parking? And unfortunately, in that case, the answer is yes.
Oh, right.
Just because you don't directly abut or you're not within 25 feet of that parking area. So I think there is general support for this from what I have heard, but again, we haven't had any direct correspondence since this ordinance has been advertised.
And I know this is not within your jurisdiction really, but in a sort of perfect world, would there be shuttles that would be running around in high, density business areas like in our South Cape, running from parking garages or parking lots to just around in that business area so that people could hop on and hop off? Or is that not something that cities are moving towards?
It is something that a lot of cities are moving towards. So this whole idea of micro-mobility, which I think you'll be hearing more about later, perhaps not so much from us, but from Public Works. The idea that in some of our downtown areas, not just Cape Coral, but other cities of comparable size, that are in many cases encouraging one-stop parking and then providing transportation options for people that want to move from point A to point B. And that can look, there is not one size that fits all there. That could include trolleys. It can include making people more aware of Uber and Lyft and those types of services. It can involve bike sharing, bike riding, scooters, all types of things.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Botana?
Yeah, I guess one of the concerns I have with this is that the part where you say a business that wanted to propose to build something can count the street parking that is nearby and so forth. Isn't that over time going to mean multiple places will be double counting, multiple counts of the same parking space?
So yes, that can occur.
And, I mean, the unfortunate reality is that there's not enough parking downtown now. And so by relaxing the restrictions that we did last year, and this, I just see we're exacerbating the problem. If we don't come up with some trolley system that the commissioner suggested, or the city step up and put in multiple-story parking lot in one of the big city lots, even if we pay for it, because there aren't very many cities where you have that kind of pressure that you don't have to pay for the parking.
Yeah, it's a good question. So
All of this gradual easing is just going to continue to exacerbate the parking problem.
So, a couple thoughts there. I don't know if I have an answer, but a couple thoughts. One, this is one reason why we're taking a very measured, incremental approach. We relax parking standards. We wait a while. We see how the business community reacts. We don't have any major parking problems that I'm aware of right now in the South Cape, so we thought it was prudent to take one more measured step to that effect. We will have a couple of parking garages that will come online, or will finish construction very soon, one at the Cove at 47th, the other just outside of the South Cape District in the Bimini, mixed-use Bimini zoning district, at Bimini Square, and the city has agreements with both developers to provide some public parking there. And then I think if you look at providing parking relief in a vacuum, you start asking those questions that you just asked. But if you looked at it in this broader context about what else the city might be doing to relieve congestion in the South Cape, and that's where you get into micro-mobility and making other transportation options available to the city, then I think some of those, maybe not all, but some of those parking concerns start to diminish a little bit.
Commissioner Severson? Nope. No longer. Okay. Do we have any other comments from the commission? Oh, Commissioner Schwartz, sorry.
Sorry. I was curious if we're going to allow businesses to, I guess, move their parking further and further and be counted, are we going to do something to increase handicap parking closer to these buildings? Or are we going to take the less mobile population into consideration as we expand this parking, or lessen the amount of spaces you have to have at your business?
Well, all of our public facilities, including our city parking areas, do have handicap parking. One thing I want to emphasize is, and something that no one has brought up, is this is voluntary. We're not requiring developers that fit into one of these three categories that I mentioned not to provide parking on their site. To my knowledge, the vast majority, with a few exceptions in the South Cape, already have parking on their sites. This would be for new development, and for redevelopment that would not be required to provide parking on their properties. But we think what's more likely to occur is that people will provide parking on the site because they want their businesses to succeed, and they've realized to some extent that they're going to have to provide some parking so people will visit their businesses. And what many other communities have found is that generally when parking reform in those communities have occurred, most people continue to provide some parking, albeit in many cases less than what was previously required. And one other thing that other communities have experienced, which doesn't mean that we'll experience here, but they have noted that more businesses are more inclined to enter into some type of shared parking arrangement or agreement with one another to share parking between sites or among sites.
Thank you. Do I have any other comments from the commission?
One more.
Commissioner Atkin?
If everybody might or might not be aware, the Public Works has been doing various public input on the parking downtown and other aspects for transportation for the master plan that they have coming out. Transportation Advisory Committee, which Councilman Welsh is a member of, a lot of information is going in through them to come up with that master plan. So, you know, if you have any questions as far as what's going on with the parking, that's probably a good committee to attend their hearings and to see what's going on as far as downtown or anywhere else in the city as far as transportation plan that they have coming up with. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no additional comments, I do believe there's particular need for easing of these restrictions in downtown Cape Coral. A lot of people, I hear it every day, drive through downtown Cape Coral and they say, this is your downtown? And you know, we have a population over 200,000. It's very low level. There's not a lot of vertical growth down there, vertical construction down there. And I think that this will allow that. And I would agree that the free market is going to encourage many businesses to put parking on their own land. That way they can have their customers have quick access to their business. But for the minority of properties that are looking to do vertical growth, this would be something that would allow them give that an avenue for our city, so I think it would be beneficial. So I think that we're heading in the right direction, certainly. With that said, do we have any motions from the commission?
Motion to approve the ordinance.
Motion to approve ordinance 21-24 made by Commissioner Apkin. Second by Commissioner Severson. Madam City Clerk, will you call the roll?
Apking,
Aye.
Watana? King?
Yes. Aye.
Marker?
Aye.
Schwartz?
Aye.
Severson? York? All ayes, motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strube. Moving on to agenda item 7C, ordinance 27-24, and I believe the city has a presentation on this as well.
Yes, we do.
I'll turn over to the
In
city.
1 minute here. Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Chad Boyko, Principal Planner with the city's Planning Division. There's the mouse. All right. So it showed up there. Okay, good morning. This is a text amendment for you guys to review. This is ordinance 27-24. This is a text amendment that would create a new future land use classification called the Mixed Use 10, or the MUX, or the MUX for short. What we're looking to do is we're amending policy 1.15 of the future land use element by adding in a new future land use classification. This is a change that would allow us to have some additional options for development within the city. We currently have a mixed use future land use classification, and this new mixed use 10 or MUX would be, in addition to that, also allowing some flexibility and some variation in how we allow for mixed use development within the city. We do not currently have any specific properties or projects that are the focus of this amendment at this current time. This is just something to provide, like you said, an extra flexibility for developers going forward. The process for text amendments is similar to large-scale future land use map amendments. They are presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission first. They come before you all for a recommendation of approval or denial. And then what happens is council will have a transmittal hearing on this case. They will make their decision whether or not to transmit this to the state for their review. If it is chosen to be transmitted to the state for state and regional review, then we would get any comments or concerns back from those state agencies, and then it would come back to the city council for their final vote on the adoption hearing. So some quick background on the mixed use 10 future land use classification. As you all know, in 1989, we originally adopted the comprehensive plan, which did include a mixed use future land use classification as part of that. The mixed use classification is one of probably the most changed future land use classifications over the years. We've tweaked it numerous times to try to find the right balance between residential, commercial. Is it one use? Is it multiple uses? The scale of the properties that can be developed within the mixed use classification. We have actually had a couple of developments that have occurred within the mixed use. Most of those have been sort of geared primarily towards residential development, including Entrada and Coral Lakes. Entrada it's kind of broken up in parts, but all of the development that has occurred at Entrada so far has been residential. Coral Lakes did have some commercial components to it. However, that has recently been amended and actually taken some of that Coral Lakes development has been taken out of the mixed use classification. Currently, there is no future land use classification which addresses mixed use development for large unplatted tracts. So we've created this classification in order to give some guidance for large tracts that want to be able to do a range of uses within their development. So that's why we have the mixed use 10. Some parameters within this new classification is that this is for larger scale tracts. The minimum size that anyone could have the mixed-use 10 designation placed upon them is 10 acres in size. So not a vastly large site, but larger than the majority of developments within Cape Coral. The residential density for the mixed-use 10 is 50 dwelling units to the acre, with a maximum floor area ratio of 3.0. And I know that there were some discussions on the floor area ratio earlier. I mean, what you're talking about with a minimum density of 50 units per acre and FIR of 3.0 is a very dense or intense development. That was kind of the goal of this, is to concentrate development within these areas. Because you have such high density and intensity within the mixed-use 10, we're looking to make sure that the mixed-use 10 can only be placed on properties where there are utilities. Obviously, if you're doing a density of 15 units per acre and an FIR of anywhere close to 3.0, it couldn't be accomplished on well and septic properties. You would need city water, sewer, and irrigation. Therefore, we've put that into the designation that you would have to have those utilities available. We also said that if you have utilities that can be available through a developer agreement or a utility agreement that is agreed upon with the developer, that would be possible as well. Areas that could be possible going forward is perhaps along the Burnstore Road area, where there's no utilities in place. But if you all remember, a year or two ago, we did present Hudson Creek, which is in the very northwest quadrant of the city. That was approved for residential commercial development. There's no utilities there currently, and it's in one of the farthest regions of the UEP. However, that developer did enter into a utility agreement with the city, which committed the developer to providing utilities at their own cost prior to any development occurring within Hudson Creek. The other component that we have with the mixed-use 10 is that development could only be approved within the zoning through a planned unit development process. There's only one zoning district that is allowed within the mixed-use 10, and that is a PUD. The reason for that is when you have a development that can be as dense and as intense as these can, the PUD process allows for a higher level of scrutiny from both staff, the hearing examiner, and the city council going forward. PUDs allow for staff and city council to have the schedule of uses be approved. So unlike other zoning districts where if you have a commercial district or a professional office district, there's already a pre-prescribed number of uses that can go into that zoning district. With the PUD, you're looking at only uses that have been agreed upon by the developer, staff, and city council that can go into those developments. Also within the mixed-use 10, you can have non-residential and mixed-use development may comprise 100% of the development within the mixed-use 10, and the ratio for this new designation is going to be a 50-50 split between residential and non-residential. The current mixed-use designation that we have at this time leans heavily towards primarily non-residential development, and the ratio that is required within that is you can only have a maximum 20% of residential development within the current mixed-use designation. This new mixed-use 10 allows for 50% non-residential and 50% residential. However, any development could obviously, as staff would be fully supportive of, provide 100% non-residential development going forward within this designation. So in conclusion, the proposed language is consistent with policy 1.19, the future land use element, which adopts urban corridor guidelines. We're looking to primarily place the mixed-use 10 along these major commercial corridors, particularly near the eastern end of Pineland Road, which is it's popular, but there are still some large tracts of land that this would be a good land use classification for. It's also consistent with policy 3.3, which is the future land use element, which refers to our need to have amendments to our comprehensive plan that allows for a further growth of our non-residential land supply. And then lastly, if adopted, staff will identify appropriate areas for this future land use map classification for further council review and discussion. And staff recommends transmittal of the proposed amendment, and I'm here for any further questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Borko. This is a public hearing. I'd like to open up to public for comment. If there's any members of the public that wish to speak, please direct yourself to the podium and state your full name for the record.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Joe Mazurkowitz, President of BJ Consulting, here on behalf of the Blue Water Development Group and specifically Victory Park. For those of you who may be aware, Victory Park has almost doubled in size recently. It's gone from it's actually more than doubled in size, 140 acres to 260 acres. We now have a large tract of land that could take advantage of this flexibility on this proposed land use. There are a couple things that we think are very good with it. We have worked with staff initially on some of the ideas. We saw an early draft, we reviewed it and said we agreed with the components of it. This kind of flexibility would promote the intensity and density to actually build a higher class project. You're going to go vertical. In 260 acres in the city of Cape Coral, most people would say you don't need to go vertical. But in a community that we understand is going to be 450,000 people, we need 270 acres of vertically integrated mixed use, and this park will allow us to do that. There are probably some other parcels in the west and northwest specifically. I know specifically of an 80-acre parcel on Bernstall Road that would also benefit tremendously from this kind of flexibility, these kind of densities and intensities, allowing much better quality to be put in place. We think this is a major step forward for the city of Cape Coral. We would respectfully request a motion to City Council to transmit, and we look forward to this becoming an opportunity for us to use this land use and then come back with the PUD zoning and build just something very special for the city of Cape Coral. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mazurkowitz. Are there any other members of the audience that wish to speak? Seeing none, we'll close citizens' input. I'll open up to the commission. Any comments from the commissioners? Commissioner York?
What is the difference between this and other, is it the size, the 10 acres that's different?
Yes, between the current mixed use that we have
Yes,
right now.
because we currently have mixed-use development.
We do. So there's there's probably three key components that makes the mixed use 10 different than what we currently have. The mixed use 10, it does have that minimum size requirement of 10 acres in order for it to be placed upon. Currently, the mixed use does not have any minimum size requirement. There's some differences with the mixed use, the existing mixed use, in terms of what the parcel size is and what can be developed. If you have a smaller parcel, that we acknowledge that it can be difficult to have a mixed use development on there, so you can oftentimes just have one use there. The second difference with the mixed use 10 from the existing mixed use is that it has different ratios of the allowed development that can be allowed on site. The current mixed use allows for a maximum of 20% residential development. Obviously, we just stated in the mixed use 10, the maximum residential development can be 50%. And then the third component is that requirement of a PUD in order for this to go forward. With the mixed use that we have currently adopted, it allows for, I believe, just about every zoning district can be developed within the mixed use. Within the mixed use 10, you'll only be able to develop through a planned unit development.
Okay, so it's more intense also, and then there's the minimum requirement. So the hope is that you'll get bigger projects
Correct.
going?
That will allow for further staff review with the PUD process.
And they can be all commercial, they don't have to have a residential component, but they can't be all residential.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Apkin?
I agree, this is something that's needed in the city to make it more attractive to some of the other developers that have probably been looking at Cape Coral, but with the restrictions that we currently have, it makes it almost impossible for them to bring in the developments that they want. So I would definitely be in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments from the commission? Seeing none, do we have a motion?
Make a motion to approve the transmittal.
Motion to approve transmittal of ordinance 27-24 made by Commissioner Apking. Second. And a second by Commissioner Schwartz. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Apking?
Aye.
Botana? Aye. King? Aye. Marker?
Aye.
Schwartz?
Aye.
Severson? York? All ayes, motion carried.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Burko. All right. Moving on to item 8, citizens input. This is a public hearing. If anybody from the audience wishes to speak, please direct themselves to the podium and state your full name for the record. Seeing none, we'll close citizens input. We'll move on to item 9, staff updates. Are there any updates from staff? Moving on, item 10, other business. No other business from the commission today, unless any business from the commissioners. Move forward. Member comments. Any comments from the commissioners? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 12, and that's the time and date of the next meeting. The next regular meeting for the Planning and Zoning Commission is scheduled for Wednesday, May 1st, 2024 at 9 a.m. in council chambers. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn made by Commissioner Atkin. All in favor? Aye. Aye. This meeting is adjourned.